Sometimes the world decides who you are before you ever say a word. Gloria Bennett stood outside the glass doors of First Federal Bank and tightened her hand around an old brass key. The morning air was cold enough to sting her cheeks, and a thin layer of frost still covered the flower beds beside the entrance. She had driven 42 miles from her small house to be here. In her purse rested a faded envelope and a photograph of her late husband. 6 months had passed since Harold Bennett had taken his final breath, yet his last request still echoed in her heart. "Go to the bank, Gloria. Take the key. They will know what to do." She had repeated those words during the entire drive. Taking a slow breath, she stepped inside. The lobby smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee. Men in expensive coats talked quietly near the investment offices. A young woman in business attire laughed into her phone. Nobody looked at Gloria as she approached the reception desk. She wore her best navy dress and a wool coat that had been carefully mended at the sleeve. "Good morning," she said softly. "I need help with a safe deposit box." The receptionist gave her a polite smile and typed into her computer. "Name, Gloria Bennett." Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. Then the smile faded. She typed again. Another moment passed. "I'm sorry, Mom. There is nothing under that name." Gloria blinked. "Would you check one more time, please?" The young woman sighed and entered the information again. "No account. No safe deposit box. No trust. There is nothing here." Gloria reached in her purse and removed the brass key. "My husband told me to bring this after he passed away." The receptionist glanced at the key and then back at Gloria. "Are you sure he used this bank?" He was very sure. She gently laid the key on the counter. "He said someone here would understand." A man waiting behind her checked his watch with obvious impatience. Another customer stepped aside and stared. The receptionist lowered her voice, but not enough to hide her irritation. "Ma'am, I do not know what to tell you. There is nothing under your name." The words hit Gloria harder the second time. She looked down at the key. It was old and worn smooth from years of being carried in Harold's pocket. She had never asked him why he kept it. Some things in a long marriage became quiet mysteries that no longer needed answers. "Could someone else look?" she asked. The receptionist folded her arms. "There is no reason to. The system is very clear." The people in line had stopped pretending not to listen. Gloria could feel their eyes on her. Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment. Slowly, she opened the faded envelope and took out the photograph inside. It showed her and Harold standing in front of a grocery store many years ago. She held it close, as though it might somehow explain everything. And for the first time since entering the bank, she wondered if her husband had sent her here for something that no longer existed. The receptionist pushed the photograph back across the counter with the tip of one finger. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but a picture is not going to change what is in the system." Gloria carefully picked it up and slipped it back into the envelope. She could feel the eyes of everyone behind her. A young man in a blue suit sighed loudly. An older woman holding a coffee cup shook her head with sympathy. The lobby suddenly felt too bright and too quiet. "Could I speak to a manager?" Gloria asked gently. The receptionist hesitated before picking up the phone. A few moments later, a middle-aged man in a gray suit approached the desk. "I understand there is a problem. This woman believes she has a safe deposit box here," the receptionist explained. "But there is nothing under her name." The manager gave Gloria a polite but distant smile. "Ma'am, our records are very accurate." Gloria nodded slowly. "I understand. But my husband asked me to come here before he passed away. He said this key belonged here." She held up the old brass key. The manager barely glanced at it. "Do you have an account number?" "No." "A document from the bank?" "No." "Any recent correspondence?" Gloria's shoulders sank a little. "No." The manager folded his hands. "Then I am afraid there is not much we can do." She looked at him with quiet disappointment. "I drove a long way this morning." "I understand, ma'am." His voice remained professional. "But there is nothing in our system." The words seemed even colder coming from him. Gloria lowered her eyes and gently rubbed the old key with her thumb. That was when she noticed something she had not seen before. On the end of the key was a tiny engraving, almost hidden by age. It was the shape of a crane inside a circle. She frowned slightly. The symbol looked familiar. Somewhere in the back of her memory, she had seen it before. Before she could think further, the glass doors of the bank opened. The atmosphere inside the lobby changed immediately. Several employees straightened their jackets. The manager turned around at once. Two men in dark suits entered first, followed by another man wearing a charcoal coat and a white dress shirt. A faint tattoo could be seen near his collar. He walked with calm confidence, and conversations throughout the lobby suddenly stopped. "Mr. Kong," the manager said quickly, hurrying forward. "We were not expecting you this morning." Ethan Kong gave a small nod, but did not answer. His attention had already moved past the manager. Across the room, he saw an elderly black woman standing at the reception desk with an old brass key in her hand. He took one step forward and then stopped completely. The color seemed to leave his face. The manager continued speaking about meetings and reports, but Ethan no longer appeared to hear a single word. His eyes remained fixed on the tiny symbol engraved on the key. Gloria looked up, confused by the sudden silence. Their eyes met across the marble floor. Something changed in Ethan's expression. It was not curiosity. It was recognition. Without saying another word, he began walking toward her. The sound of Ethan Kang's shoes against the marble floor seemed to echo through the entire lobby. Nobody spoke. Even the receptionist, who had been so certain only moments before, watched him with wide eyes. He stopped directly in front of Gloria and looked down at the old brass key in her hand. For several seconds, he said nothing at all. Then he asked a question so softly that only the people nearest to them could hear it. "May I see that?" Gloria hesitated for only a moment before placing it in his hand. Ethan turned it over carefully. His thumb rested on the tiny engraving of the crane. A memory seemed to pass across his face. "I know this symbol," he said quietly. The manager stepped closer. "Sir, is there some problem?" Ethan did not answer. He looked at Gloria instead. "Where did you get this?" "It belonged to my husband," she replied. "He carried it for many years." "Your husband's name?" "Harold Bennett." Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment. Then he looked back at her. "Did your husband ever mention the Kong family?" Gloria blinked in surprise. "Yes." The answer seemed to stop the air in the room. "Not often," she continued, "but I remember the name." Ethan swallowed slowly. "What did he say?" Gloria thought for a moment. "He said there was once a family that needed help. That was all he ever told me." Ethan looked down at the key again. "My father used to keep a photograph in his desk. He showed it to me many times when I was young." He lifted his eyes to hers. In that photograph was a man and woman standing in front of a grocery store. Gloria's breath caught. She slowly removed the old picture from the envelope and handed it to him. Ethan stared at it, as if he had been transported back 20 years. There could be no mistake. The same store, the same smiling couple, the same picture he had seen throughout his childhood. He looked at Gloria again, and this time there was unmistakable emotion in his eyes. "I cannot believe it," he whispered. "It is you." The manager looked confused. "Sir, who is she?" Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he returned the photograph to Gloria with great care. Then he looked at the manager. "Open the executive archives." The manager frowned. "Sir, now." The tone in Ethan's voice left no room for discussion. "But those files have not been accessed in decades." Ethan's expression never changed. "Then today is the day." The manager hurried away with two employees following behind him. The lobby remained silent. Gloria looked at Ethan with uncertainty. "I do not understand what is happening." He looked at her gently for the first time. "Neither do I." Completely. He glanced once more at the key in her hand. "But my father spent half his life waiting for someone to walk through these doors carrying that symbol." Gloria's eyes widened. "Me?" Ethan nodded slowly. "I think my family has been waiting for you for a very long time." 10 minutes later, the branch manager returned carrying a long black case and several dusty folders. Two employees followed him, both looking nervous. The entire lobby had gone silent. Customers who should have been leaving remained exactly where they were, as though everyone understood they were about to witness something important. The manager placed the black case on a small table near the windows. He looked at Ethan uncertainly. "Sir, these records were stored in the executive archives. Some of them are more than 20 years old." Ethan nodded once. Open it. The manager carefully unlocked the case. Inside was a small wooden box, dark with age and carved with the same crane symbol that appeared on the brass key. Gloria drew in a slow breath. She had never seen the box before, but somehow it felt familiar. Beside it rested several sealed envelopes and a thick folder tied with a blue ribbon. Ethan stared at the box without moving. My father kept this symbol everywhere, he said quietly. I have not seen this box since I was a boy. The manager opened the folder and adjusted his glasses. There's a record attached. He cleared his throat and began to read. Private trust account established 23 years ago by Mr. Min Kong. Instructions. This account may only be opened upon presentation of the original brass key and verification of the designated beneficiary. He stopped reading and looked up. The lobby became completely still. Beneficiary, he continued, Mrs. Gloria Bennett. A soft gasp spread through the room. The receptionist covered her mouth with her hand. Gloria blinked several times. That cannot be right. The manager looked back at the document. There is also a handwritten instruction. Ethan held out his hand. Give it to me. The manager carefully passed him the paper. Ethan unfolded it and immediately recognized his father's handwriting. For a long moment he simply stared at the first sentence. Then he read it aloud. If the woman holding this key is Gloria Bennett, treat her with the gratitude and respect our family owes her. Ethan's voice had become almost a whisper. He continued reading silently, and the expression on his face changed completely. Gloria watched him with growing confusion. What does it say? She asked softly. Ethan slowly lowered the letter. His eyes looked brighter than before. It says that everything my family has today exists because of you and your husband. The room seemed to stop breathing. Gloria shook her head. There must be some mistake. Harold and I never did anything extraordinary. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. According to my father, you did something he never forgot. He reached into the wooden box and found another envelope resting beneath the letters. On the front, written in careful handwriting, were 4 simple words. For Gloria Bennett only. He gently handed it to her. Her fingers trembled as she accepted it. For the first time since walking into the bank that morning, she no longer felt like a woman who had come to the wrong place. She felt as though she had just opened the first page of a story her husband had been protecting for decades. Gloria carefully opened the envelope with both hands. The paper inside had yellowed with age, and the handwriting was slightly faded but still easy to read. She recognized the name at the bottom before she read a single word. Min Kong. She looked up at Ethan in surprise and then slowly began reading. Dear Mrs. Bennett, if this letter has reached you, then many years have passed, and I have finally kept the promise I made to your husband. I prayed that one day I would thank you properly for what you and Harold did for my family. Gloria's eyes widened. She kept reading. 23 years ago, I was ready to close my store forever. I had debts I could not pay and a young son who deserved a better life than I could give him. Then you and your husband walked in my store and changed everything. Gloria's hand began to tremble. The memories returned all at once. The old grocery store, the worried man behind the counter, the empty shelves. She could almost hear Harold's voice again. We have enough saved, Gloria. We can help him. She continued reading. You gave me every dollar you had saved for your first home. You asked for nothing in return. When I tried to repay you, your husband smiled and said that someday I should simply help someone else. Ethan lowered his eyes. He had heard pieces of this story as a child, but never the details. The lobby remained silent as Gloria read the final lines. I invested the money you gave me. My business survived. Years later, my son built something greater than I ever imagined. Everything our family has become possible because 2 kind people believed in a stranger. The account in this box is not repayment. It is gratitude. Please accept it, because there are debts that money can never settle. A tear slipped down Gloria's cheek. She slowly lowered the letter and looked at Ethan. Harold never told me he kept in touch with your father. Ethan nodded gently. Neither did mine. The branch manager cleared his throat and opened another folder. There's also a financial statement attached to the trust. He looked up in disbelief. The account has grown through investments and additional contributions made by Mr. Min Kong over the years. He swallowed hard. Its current value is $1,800,000. The room became completely still. The receptionist stared at him in shock. Several customers gasped softly. Gloria blinked. That cannot belong to me. It does, the manager said quietly. Every document is in your name. She shook her head. Harold and I lent your father less than $10,000. Ethan smiled sadly. My father used to say that kindness grows when people refuse to forget it. He looked at the letter in her hand. I think this was his way of making sure your kindness kept growing. Gloria looked down at the old paper once more. She remembered every dollar she and Harold had saved, every extra shift they had worked, and every sacrifice they had made. They had never regretted helping a struggling family. But she never imagined that a simple act of generosity would travel through 23 years and return her in. A room full of strangers. For several long seconds, nobody in the lobby said a word. The number seemed too large to belong in the quiet room. $1,800,000. Gloria looked from the documents to Ethan and then back to the letter in her hands. I cannot accept this, she whispered. This was never why Harold and I helped your father. Ethan watched her carefully. There was no excitement in her face, no greed, only disbelief and sadness. It reminded him of every story his father had told him. My father knew you would say that, he said softly. He reached into the wooden box and removed another folded piece of paper. There's one more letter. He opened it and read aloud. If Gloria tries to refuse this gift, remind her that gratitude is not a burden. It is a bridge between people. Let her know that accepting kindness is also an act of kindness. Ethan lowered the paper slowly. A tear glistened in his eyes, though he quickly blinked it away. Gloria pressed her lips together. Your father always had beautiful words. He learned many of them from you and Harold, Ethan replied. The branch manager removed his glasses and looked at Gloria with a completely different expression than before. Mrs. Bennett, I owe you an apology. We all do. He turned toward the receptionist, whose face had become pale with embarrassment. The young woman stepped forward slowly. I am so sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I should have listened. I should have treated you with more respect. Gloria looked at her for a long moment. Then she gave a small, gentle smile. We all make mistakes, sweetheart. The kindness in her answer seemed to make the young woman even more emotional. She lowered her eyes and nodded. Ethan looked around the lobby. A few customers quietly wiped tears from their faces. Others stood completely still, as though they had forgotten where they were. Then, without warning, Ethan stepped toward Gloria and lowered his head. The room fell silent again. The powerful man everyone had hurried to greet only an hour earlier now stood before an elderly woman with complete humility. Mrs. Bennett, he said softly, my father spent his entire life hoping he could thank you properly. He looked up at her. I cannot thank you for him, and I cannot repay what you gave my family, but I can honor it. Gloria looked at him with surprise. You do not owe me anything. He smiled sadly. I think my entire life proves otherwise. Then, to the astonishment of everyone watching, Ethan slowly bent one knee and bowed his head. A soft gasp echoed across the lobby. The branch manager looked stunned. The receptionist covered her mouth again. Ethan remained there for several seconds before speaking. Thank you for saving my father's dream. Gloria's eyes filled with tears. She had never imagined that a simple decision made in a small grocery store 23 years earlier would bring her to this moment. Her hand trembled as she reached forward and gently touched his shoulder. Please stand up, she said quietly. Your father already thanked us by remembering. That is more than enough. Slowly, Ethan stood again. The lobby remained silent, as if nobody wanted to break the fragile moment that had settled over the room. Gloria withdrew her hand from his shoulder and looked around. A little while earlier, she had been standing in the same place, feeling invisible. Now every face carried a different expression. Some looked ashamed. Others looked thoughtful. A few simply looked moved. The branch manager cleared his throat. Mrs. Bennett, there is something else in the box. He carefully lifted a small photo album from beneath the documents. The leather cover had faded with age. Ethan looked surprised. I had never seen that before. Gloria accepted the album and slowly opened it. On the first page was a picture of a young Min Kong standing in front of his grocery store. On the next page was another photograph. This time she froze. It showed Harold and herself sitting at a small table with Min Kong and a much younger Ethan beside him. She smiled through her tears. I remember this day. Ethan stepped closer. You do. Your father invited us to dinner after the store reopened. You were carrying around a toy airplane and would not let anyone touch it. To everyone's surprise, Ethan laughed softly. I still have. That airplane. Gloria looked up. You do? He nodded. My father kept everything that reminded him of hopeful days. She turned another page. There were more photographs. Birthdays, holidays, and even newspaper clippings about the store's success. Then she noticed something tucked inside the back cover. It was a folded card written in Min Kang's careful handwriting. She opened it slowly. If you are reading this, then perhaps you have forgotten what you gave us. So I made this album to remember it for you. Families are not always connected by blood. Sometimes they are connected by kindness. Gloria pressed the card against her chest. For several seconds, she could not speak. Ethan looked at her with quiet understanding. My father considered you family, he said gently. A tear rolled down her cheek. I did not know. I did not think he ever found the right way to tell you. She laughed softly through her tears. That sounds like your father. A warm smile spread across Ethan's face. Then he looked around the lobby. Every employee was still watching. Every customer remained silent. Finally, he said, My father spent his entire life remembering a simple act of kindness. I think all of us should remember something from today as well. Nobody answered. They did not need to. The lesson had already settled into the room. The receptionist slowly approached Gloria again. I hope one day I can be the kind of person your husband was. Gloria looked at her kindly. You can. Every day gives us another chance. The young woman's eyes filled with tears. She nodded and stepped back. Ethan glanced at the old photo album in Gloria's hands and smiled. You came here looking for a safe deposit box. He paused. Instead, I think you found a family that never forgot you. Gloria held the photo album against her chest as though it contained something far more valuable than money. In truth, it did. For 6 months, she had lived alone in the small house she and Harold had shared for nearly 30 years. Since his passing, every room had felt quieter. Every morning had seemed a little longer. And now, standing in the middle of a bank lobby, she had discovered that the kindness she and her husband gave away had never disappeared. It had been carefully protected by another family all this time. Ethan noticed the emotion in her eyes. Would you like to sit down for a moment? He asked gently. She nodded. He guided her toward a pair of chairs near the tall windows. Snow had begun falling outside, covering the sidewalks in soft white flakes. For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Gloria smiled faintly. Harold would have enjoyed this. Ethan looked at her. Why do you say that? She laughed softly. Because he always believed the world was smaller than we think. He used to say that kindness has a way of coming back when you least expect it. Ethan lowered his eyes. My father used to say the same thing. The coincidence made them both smile. After a moment, Gloria looked at the wooden box beside her. I never came here for money. I know, Ethan said quietly. She looked out the window at the falling snow. I came because it was the last thing my husband asked me to do. I thought maybe there was a document inside, or an old account he forgot to mention. Her voice softened. I did not realize he was sending me back to people who remembered him. Ethan's expression changed. There was something deeply moving in those words. Then perhaps he knew exactly what he was doing. She turned to him. What do you mean? He smiled gently. You lost your husband 6 months ago. My father has been gone for 3 years. Maybe the two of them left this behind because they knew we would need each other someday. Gloria looked at him in surprise. Then she laughed softly again. That sounds almost magical. No, Ethan said. It sounds like something two kind men would plan. For the first time that morning, she laughed without tears in her eyes. The sound seemed to brighten the entire room. Even the branch manager smiled from across the lobby. A few moments later, the receptionist approached carrying a small potted plant with white flowers. Mrs. Bennet, she said shyly, this sits on my desk every day. I would like you to have it. Gloria looked up in surprise. Oh, sweetheart, I could not take your plant. Please do, the young woman replied. I think it belongs with someone who reminds people to be kind. Gloria accepted the little plant with both hands. Thank you. The receptionist smiled through tears and stepped away. Ethan watched the exchange and shook his head with admiration. My father described you perfectly. Gloria looked at him curiously. And how did he describe me? Ethan smiled warmly. He said you were the kind of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave behind something beautiful. An hour later, the documents had been signed, copies had been prepared, and the old wooden box sat safely beside Gloria's purse. The snow outside had become heavier, covering the streets in white. One by one, the customers finally began to leave, but many glanced back at Gloria before walking out the door, as though they knew they had witnessed something they would never forget. Ethan stood beside her near the entrance. Do you have a long drive home? He asked. She nodded. About 42 miles. He smiled gently. Then let me have someone drive you. Gloria laughed softly. I have my own car, and it has been faithful to me for 10 years. I do not doubt it, he said, smiling. But I would still feel better knowing you arrived safely. She looked at him for a moment. There was such sincerity in his face that it reminded her of his father. All right, she said finally. I will accept the ride. The answer seemed to please him more than she expected. Before they stepped outside, the branch manager approached with a small envelope in his hand. Mrs. Bennet, these are the details of the trust and my personal number. If you need anything, you call me directly. She accepted it with a grateful smile. Thank you. He lowered his head respectfully. No, ma'am. Thank you. I think everyone in this building learned something important today. The receptionist stepped forward as well. Will you come back and visit us sometime? Gloria looked surprised. You would want that? The young woman smiled through slightly red eyes. Very much. Gloria laughed softly. Then I think I will. Outside, the cold air felt different than it had that morning. The sky seemed brighter, and the snow looked almost beautiful. A black car waited by the curb. Ethan opened the door for her. She carefully placed the wooden box, the photo album, and the little potted plant on the seat beside her. Before getting in, she looked at him. I came here thinking I was keeping a promise to my husband. She paused. Now I think he was keeping a promise to me. Ethan looked at her with curiosity. What promise was that? She smiled gently. That I would never be alone. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan reached into his coat pocket and removed a small card. He handed it to her. This has my number on it. If you ever need anything, or if you simply want company for dinner, you call me. Gloria looked at the card and then back at him. You really mean that? He smiled. Family should stay in touch. The words seemed to settle softly between them. Family. Tears filled her eyes once more. But this time they were not tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude. She stepped into the car and looked out the window as it began to pull away from the bank. Ethan remained standing on the sidewalk, his hands in his coat pockets, watching until the car disappeared into the falling snow. And on that quiet winter afternoon, an elderly woman who had walked into a bank believing she had been forgotten drove home carrying something far more valuable than money. She carried proof that kindness never truly disappears. It simply waits for the right moment to find its way back home.